Okay. So my father's an orderly, and Glenn's an orderly at Port Harrison, and Roy's a patient. And it's prohibition. It's the roaring 20s, and it's prohibition. And so my father gets to be a band member. He plays the banjo and sings and leads this band. And I've got a better photograph of it, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute. But first, I found this one, and these were the Jester Boys. Now, in those days, cowboys were perceived to be one step away from gangsters. It wasn't perceived to be a successful career if you were a cowboy. You were kind of at the bottom of the social scale. You're out most of the year with the cattle and the sheep and whatever kind of ranch it is. And so anyway, these were the five Jester Boys. And so this is James, the oldest, and Glenn, and this is the youngest. That's Frank, my father's younger brother. That's my father, Harold. And this one here is Roy, the one who was injured in World War I. Roy, Harold, Frank, Glenn, and James, the Jester Boys. And this was my father's band. The band was called the Rainbow Syncopated, or Syncopators. There's my father. Couple women singers, I guess. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you a lot about my mother in this program. We'll do that maybe in the next program, but she's from a whole different background. My mother was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. Her father, I believe his first name was Jack, and her mother's name was Golda, or Goldie, and they were Jewish. He was a meat packer. And at that time, Omaha was the meat packing capital, maybe of the world, but certainly of North America. And I don't know how big his company was or any of that. I was there when I was 5, and I don't remember it very well. They had kind of a piece of downtown Omaha that was commercial. It was on a kind of a main street, and so there were a couple businesses, and then above and behind were apartments, and one of the apartments was theirs. And he was very strict, so his wife, Goldie, had to stay in the home. She wasn't allowed to work. I mean, she worked 18 hours a day in the home taking care of him and these 3 kids. She had 2 brothers and 1 sister. I believe she was the oldest, I believe. And the father was so ornery, he wouldn't let his children date anyone who wasn't very right-wing, rigid Jewish. So one of the sons fell in love with a woman who wasn't, and I think married her. And I don't believe the father ever talked to him again. Lewis, I think his name was. And my mother, great student and very hip young woman, and she decided she wanted to be a nurse. There were very few things women could do that would earn them kind of a living, but nursing was one. And he was absolutely adamant you couldn't. No daughter of his was ever going to wash anybody else's feet. So when she graduated from high school, she went to Lincoln, Nebraska to be a nurse. And he went to Lincoln and physically grabbed her and took her back to Omaha. And she said, listen, and went back to Lincoln. And that was it. She stayed in Lincoln. And very single-minded, wouldn't, very, very cute, but wouldn't allow herself a meaningful personal relationship. Graduated with honors. And I'm not sure quite when, about 1928, I think. She was born, I think, in 1906. She was a year younger than my father. So anyway, she graduated, and there was a woman, great friend of hers, named Dolores. And Dolores had fallen in love with some young guy on a motorcycle named Carl. And Carl put Dolores on the back of the motorcycle, and they got as far as Helena, Montana. And so when she graduated, my mother decided she would not only be a nurse, she would be a nurse in Alaska. That was very adventurous then. So she got a railroad ticket to go from Omaha to Fairbanks, Alaska, and it went through Helena. So she could get off and visit her best girlfriend, Dolores. And they were having an emergency out at Fort Harris in the hospital, and they desperately needed a nurse to help. And they found out about her and conned her into coming out to help just in the surgery, just as an emergency, for just a little while. And so she put off part 2 of going to Alaska. And here's this cowboy, this orderly, Harold. And Anne had never met anybody like Harold. I mean, he was tall and handsome and a singer with his own band. In Prohibition, that meant there was a nightclub he performed at called the Whitehall, I think, on the road to Great Falls, outside of Helena a few miles, where the law didn't matter. Well, he was a whirlwind, and she fell in love or fell in confusion or fell in some kind of amazement and agreed to marry Harold. And they went to Whitehall, took a couple that were pals with them. That was a few miles away from Helena. And they got married. And here she is with this ticket to Fairbanks. And he didn't have a ticket, and they didn't have a lot of money. So he got work washing dishes in a saloon in Great Falls, and she went on their honeymoon by herself. Wanted to check out Alaska, so she went, checked it all out, but she came back. And, I don't know, a couple of years later, here comes Jack. December 26, 1930. The Great Depression started in October 1929. Took a while for the Great Depression to get to Helena, but it and I arrived pretty much at the same time. So now I think I have to possibly go back and find some pictures of my mother's childhood and maybe think through a few things I may be able to tell you that we haven't covered here. But this is probably a good place to take a little break. Okay? And you understand that we want you to tell your life story. All women should tell their life story. By the time a woman is in her mid-years and maybe her kids are just getting out on their own, she's got a lot of stories. And eventually there'll be great-granddaughters that will be fascinated. So you need to do this. And you come here and we'll do it, or You'll do it, but you need to tell your life story. Nobody else can do it. Nobody knows it. Only you. And it matters a lot. And so, if I'm going to ask you to do something, I should make myself do it. So that's why we're doing this. So we'll do a little more about my mother, and then that'll take us to the Great Depression, World War II, all those wonderful topics. Okay. Thank you. Oh, I wanted to say, this was my father's hat. He always wore this. And this was his banjo. Beautiful instrument, very heavy. I don't know what to do with it, but I'm not going to put it out with the garbage, so it'll be here. See you later.